Hi, everyone, and welcome to Autism Hope Library. I am just really excited about our next guest. I think you're in for a real treat. Today, we have Dawnmarie Gaivin, and she is an amazing, amazing person, first and foremost, but she's also the co-founder of Empowered 2, and we're going to be talking about what that means. But today, we're going to be talking about hope for your struggling communicator, which I know many of us are dealing with. So thank you so much for being here, Dawnmarie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited. For everybody watching, just for you guys to know, I recently met Dawnmarie a few weeks ago, and honestly, I think this woman is a game changer. So I am excited to bring her to you guys. Before we get started, let's talk about why you're so passionate.
Well, I am not only a practitioner who teaches spelling to communicate to non-speakers, but I'm a mom, and I am a mom of two boys, Evan and Trey. Evan will turn 19 this summer, and Trey is 17 and a half, and they are both autistic. They both were developing typically and then regressed and lost all their speech. Trey regained a little bit. He's a minimal speaker, what we call a minimal speaker, and Evan is completely non-speaking. And in 2015, I started teaching Evan to use a letterboard to communicate. And by 2017, I became a practitioner because there were so many families here. I live in the San Diego area who were all struggling with the school system and feeling like the schools weren't really meeting the needs of our non-speakers. And once I discovered spelling through letterboards, I thought, oh my gosh, all of these kids could access their curriculum wherever they are, as long as they could communicate. And so my practice, my local practice, which is actually Transcending Apraxia, started in 2017, and I've been doing it ever since.
I think that's fantastic. And so let's talk about, spelling to communicate and how does that work? So first of all, what is that?
Okay, so when we communicate right now, or I should say this, all forms of communication require motor planning, which means moving muscles, right? So if I'm talking, then it means moving my lips and my tongue and my articulators, all the little muscles in my voice and my throat. If I'm writing, I use my hand and a pen, and I have to grip the pen. If I make a facial expression, I have to move those muscles. So no matter what it is, every form of communication requires moving your body purposefully, accurately, reliably, so you can read the handwriting, whatever it is. Speech is a motor skill. So that's a motor skill. Language is actually 100% a cognitive thing. So like right now, when I'm talking and you're hearing my voice, like your ear, the sound goes into your ear and into your brain, into this little area called Wernicke's area. And your brain is saying, oh, those are speech sounds, right? That's not a truck going by or a cat meowing. Those are words. That's your receptive language center. It's totally intact. And then that signal travels down a bundle of fibers to this other part of your brain called Broca's area. And now you're having thoughts about what I'm saying, whether it's like, oh, I've heard her say this on 2 other interviews, or I've read this in the book, or whatever. You're thinking things. That's your expressive language. So your receptive language and your expressive language can be totally intact, but nobody knows that until you have a reliable motoric way to communicate those thoughts that are in your head. And so there's been this misperception in autism that if you aren't communicating through pointing accurately to a flashcard or to gestures or to use speech, if you're not communicating, they think you're not thinking. They think you don't have the thoughts, or that you misunderstand when you can't follow a direction, like go pick up your shoes. If your body doesn't actually pick up the shoes, we think, oh, you must not know what shoes are. And that's been kind of the big aha as the research has come out about apraxia and dyspraxia, which is basically difficulty in motor planning. That's the breakdown that our kids are experiencing. All our kids who are struggling to communicate, who are non-speakers or minimal speakers or unreliable speakers, has nothing to do with a breakdown in their language centers. It has to do with getting the signal, that thought, to fire neurons to make the muscles do the communication part of it. So in S2C, we decided, I didn't invent it, but we have taken communication out of the fine motor muscles of your articulators, because fine motor is actually a lot more complicated to do than gross motor things like shoulder, big leg, big muscle movements. Fine motor takes a lot more of your motor strip to execute those movements. So we take communication out of the fine motor and we're putting it in the shoulder, into the gross motor of where, like, I've got a letter board up. I should not blur my background so you can actually see the boards. So I have a letter board up and you're literally going to use your shoulder and point, right, to a letter. So by poking like this, it's not really fine motor anymore. I'm not using my fingers and my hand. I'm just using my shoulder in the same movement over and over and over again, which becomes easier to teach, easier to master. And then you gain accuracy and you can start using these same letter boards to communicate your own thoughts. That's like kind of a very condensed version of like how S2C works, but it's basically, we're going to bypass fine motor, use gross motor, and then coach you, like presuming competence, believe you understand, coach you that way until it's like playing baseball. You can hit that ball with that bat. So when I throw up a board and I say, hey, we're going to spell apple, without me telling you where to go, you're going to get to a point where you go, hey, there's the A. Okay, there's the P. All right, P, like, and you're going to find it on your own. And graduate all the way up these boards till you're spelling on a board that has the whole alphabet and spelling open-ended conversational thoughts.
I love that. And how I kind of thought of it for those that are watching and listening, because I know some of you guys are listening on our podcast, some of you guys are watching it in the library. You know, for me, when you were talking about it and we're still in the early stages of learning it, it really is another language, right? And so when somebody's blind and they, you know, they're reading, you know, through Braille, or somebody's deaf and they're learning sign language, nobody questions that as another language, right? We absolutely know that's another language. And I feel with autism and those on the spectrum that have the issues that you just described, often, you know, many people just assume that they weren't thinking, or they weren't all there, or they weren't in there. Obviously, us being parents, we know our kiddos are in there and at any age. And I just don't think there's really been, up until, you know, the last maybe 5-10 years, and it's really still emerging, right? This particular therapy. And it's not really a therapy in my mind, really. I don't even like to call it that. I really think of it as, this is a new language, and our kiddos, again, and I always specify this, and I always say this often, of any age, I don't care if your kid is 2, 52, 92, like at any age, I feel like if we can help them understand a language that makes sense to them, right, then they can communicate with us. And at some point, I assume with Braille, and again, I don't know, but I assume with Braille and I assume with sign language, somebody had to figure that out along the way. And that's where I feel with autism, we're still so new in so many ways of like learning what our families need. And so I'm really excited about this. And I've just seen too many families, especially on social media, talk about it. And really, I've seen the last several years, and it's so exciting for me. And I can't wait for my kiddo to be able to do better and better with it. And we're trying. And again, I imagine if I just learned Braille, I wouldn't be great at it, you know, for a while either. Or if I just learned, you know, sign language, I wouldn't be amazing at it right away. So you're here to kind of coach us so that we could coach our kids to then eventually we know how to communicate with one another. Is that a good way to picture it, I guess? Or paint the picture?
Yes, I definitely will describe Spelling to Communicate as a parent-driven program. And by that, I don't mean, hey, just order a set of letter boards, give it a whirl. Like, you do want to get some guidance from a registered practitioner at first, because there are different boards that you might start out on, and they can look at the unique sensory and motor profile of your child so that they can save you a lot of time, right? Like they'll say, hey, you're going to get fluent, meaning accurate. You'll have accuracy and flow and be able to fade back some of those prompts faster with your child if you use these boards at first. So there's just some initial like discretion that a practitioner can really help provide, and then go home and then yes, you go home and practice. We coach you on how to go home and practice a little bit every day, or even 3 or 4 times a week, whatever is your resources really. If you can practice every day, you're going to get to open-ended communication that much faster. If you can practice 3 times a week, that's great. If you're practicing 3 times a week and you see a practitioner when you're getting to a new transition point, like when you've graduated, because you've got such accuracy and flow on these boards that you're like, hey, I know we're ready to go to a board that has the whole alphabet, but now I don't know how to prompt, right? Like I don't know what to do when the question I'm asking has 4 different answers. Which one does he go to? And you're like, well, whichever one he picks. Okay, well, how do I support his motor planning without telling him which one to pick? I'm like, well, let me show you. Let me coach you on how to do that, how you prompt without telling him up, over, right? Like, because you have to learn that next stage. So there are like certain key points. And when you go from this board to a laminated letter board, and now there's less sensory feedback, because by the way, we're trying to get all the way up to where you're typing on a keyboard and you're having voice output from technology, from like an app on Proloquo for text or something, and they have their voice for them, and you no longer have to read like what they're spelling, right? Because now they're ready to type it directly onto the screen for you. That's where we're going with this for everyone who wonders what's the end game. I mean, everyone's goal is, can they type independently where like no one's even holding a keyboard or whatever. And I've got 7 students in my practice who are working on that now, where the keyboard's literally in, we call it the cradle. Someone actually, I think JB Hanley named it the cradle, but we put it in a stand in front of the iPad and they're typing without anybody holding it. Jamie Hanley's actually working with the keyboard flat on the table now in 2 hands typing. And I'm still there because sometimes his motor might stall, like he's spelling and typing. And then all of a sudden, because of sensory processing differences, something interrupts his flow. So we're still working on that to get fully autonomous, but it's only been a couple of years since he started this. And I think about how long I spent trying to get my son spelling, just communicating something beyond basic wants and needs, like on a device or any other way. 2 years is unbelievable for a response time. And I'd say everybody can get to a 26 letter board and spelling open thoughts within 12 to 15 months, as long as you're practicing and getting some coaching. So aside from if you've got kids with really complex, like additional diagnoses, cerebral palsy, legally blind, like there are conditions that I would say it's going to take a little longer than that. But still, I kind of stand by, everybody can get there. It just, sometimes you have to take a little longer road up the mountain, depending on what you ordered off the motor menu.
I love that. I love that analogy. And I love hearing the success stories. It's just, it gets us, it continues to keep us inspired and it motivates us. And it gets kind of like that fire that we kind of need to go, okay, let's go for it, because if one person can do it, then why not you? And why not this person or that person? Like, why not? Like, why would you not try? One of the things I know when I was first learning about you and the work that you're doing, the word apraxia came, it's all over your website. It's, you talk about it often. And I know with my own son, we've heard the word apraxia. We've been told he has apraxia. I didn't feel like we could ever really find anybody that understood a lot, even though we love our therapists and we love our speech language pathologists and everybody else, under the sun. Apraxia seems to be one of those challenges for many of us of we don't know how to help and we don't really understand it. We understand it, but we don't understand it. So let's talk about it. First of all, what is apraxia and what is the difference between speech versus language?
Okay. Yeah, great. So apraxia in layman's terms, we call it a brain-body disconnect, right? It's like having the thoughts about what it is you want your body to do, but then not always being able to consistently execute that motor plan. So you can even think about it like if someone had a stroke and their language centers are completely intact, but they lack the ability to speak clearly the words that they want to say. This can happen for I call everyone spellers now, because some people identify as autistic, some people identify more as a person with autism, some people, and when I say spellers, it becomes this universal phrase, like, because not everyone identifies as non-speaking. For our purposes, we call non-speakers anyone who speech is not their primary, most effective method of communication. So like I've got students who come to see me who talk nonstop, but they completely script the entire time and they can't answer questions. Like they can't have conversations with their parents or dialogue. So they actually still benefit from spelling to communicate, because when we bypass the automaticity of what their voice and their mouth are doing, they have other thoughts besides those things that are coming out, which is pretty awesome and very stress relieving to them, by the way, to have another way to express themselves, because people believe what they say is what they mean all the time. So apraxia is any of those situations where, like, you're obviously less apraxic if you can make all those speech sounds. Like if you can script or echolalic, like, communicate through that, then you have less apraxia than my son, Evan, who can't say anything. He has probably 10 single syllable, poorly articulated words that I know what they mean, but you don't know what they mean. So he's pretty severely apraxic and has difficulty with even gross motor control. Now, every year that we've worked on this, he's gotten better and better and better. And he's a fluent speller and has much more motor control than he did when he was 11 and we were first starting S2C. But that's what it is. There's some breakdown between the thinking and the doing, and it is consistently inconsistent. So there are days where my son, on demand, I can say, hey, Evan, say, Baba, which is what he says for mama. He can't make the M sound, but he'll say Baba. And I'll say Baba, and he can repeat me. There are other days I'll say Baba, and he can't do it. For all the trying in the world, he cannot in that moment say Baba, right? That's apraxia. And so it's confusing to people like who are just hearing about this for the first time to go, well, my son or daughter has great motor skills. What do you mean there's a motor breakdown? They can rollerblade, they can 10-finger type into the YouTube search bar. They can, for videos that they want to watch, like there's all these things that they can do. And I always say, well, the litmus test still comes back to, can they use their speech as their primary, most effective method of communication? Like, can they have conversations with you? Can they tell you about their day? If they cannot, then there is some breakdown between what they're thinking and what they're doing. Right. And the old model would tell you, no, there's a cognitive deficit. I haven't met a single person, nor has my mentor, previous mentors, or any of my colleagues met a single person who actually meets a cognitive intellectual disability diagnosis once given this reliable method of communication. I hold out that I will meet somebody someday who has an intellectual disability, but I even have multiple students in my practice with Down syndrome, and none of them have an intellectual disability either. So far, it's turning out to be apraxia with them as well. So that's pretty amazing. And I'm excited for like neuroscience. Yeah. What's neuroscience going to do for us to say, okay, that's what this has been all along. So how do we treat the apraxia and the dyspraxia, right? So we can help people overcome challenges. That's why my business is called Transcending Apraxia, by the way. It used to be Transcending Autism and Apraxia. And I had some speaking autistics take offense to that because they've said, I don't want to transcend my autism. And I was like, you know what? I will totally change the business name, but I will say this. My non-speakers who are fluent typers in my practice give me advice all the time. And they do want to transcend parts of their autism. They don't like their seizure disorder and they don't like their GI issues. They don't like, they don't identify in the same way as you do, but because you're autistic and I'm not, I'm happy to take that out of the name of my business. Everybody agrees though, let's transcend this obstacle to fluent communication. Let's transcend this thing that makes my body do one thing when my brain wants me to do another. Like, let's rise above that, not disown it, not say, hey, I'm not this thing, but like, I want to live a fuller, freer, more autonomous life and share who I am with the world, right? So when you can do that through communication, like, that's awesome. So that's kind of what apraxia is. And then the speech versus language, which is what we were talking about before, is back to motor versus cognitive, right? So speech is motor and language is cognitive. And so when you know that speech is a motor skill and you've got apraxia, you're going to have problems with speech, but it doesn't mean you have problems with language.
Okay, I love that. And that's, I think for so many families out there, it's just, you get all these words thrown at you. I remember when you first get the diagnosis, you're just like, I'm sorry, what? Sounds like
Yep.
supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And you're just like, I don't know. And then there's some moms that are awesome. They have like these binders, and I've talked about this in the past, but and they're so good. They have like the color markers and like all the tabs. And then there's me, and I'm like, what slide are they on? Like, hold on, I need a dictionary, and so it's really great to be able to hear it in a way that we can easily digest. And so I love that you explained it that way.
One more thing really quick. Sorry, speech therapists, I think, and I'm not an SLP. I'm an assistive technology specialist, but I'm not an SLP. They diagnose apraxia differently than like an OT would diagnose it. Like an OT will call it dyspraxia. And you could probably very quickly, if you have a child with autism, get a dyspraxia diagnosis. But your SLP may or may not agree that your child has apraxia unless they have some speech, because they're taught that the child has to be consistently inconsistent with speech production. So for years, my son was completely non-verbal, like non-speaking, no sounds, no whatever. And I said, I think he has apraxia. And my SLP, who's a good friend of mine, was like, well, DM, like I can't diagnose him as that until he tries to say these words and can't do it, which is so strange, right? Because really the treatment he needed was treatment for apraxia. So I'm going to throw that out there too, in case people are listening and like their SLP says, no, it's not apraxia, because they are taught to diagnose it differently than sort of the practical way we're looking at it, and probably for all purposes oversimplifying it, but because we have this thing that bypasses the problem and helps. So we don't get caught in the weeds, I guess, is what I'm saying.
No, yeah, I think it's one of those things where even when you find people that talk about apraxia, like you said, if it's an SLP, they think it one way. If it's even a biomedical doctor, they may think of it as a different way, and an OT. So, for those that are, listening and watching, how do they know if spelling to communicate is right for their child? And again, I say child, but please don't email me or text me, guys. 25292. Don't care how old they are, but there's somebody's kiddo somewhere. So, how do they know if this is right for them?
I know we just did our very first Empowered to Immersion Week last week in Tampa. We had 15 families come together for like this transformational, literally camp, and some of our spellers, 3 of them were over 30. And it was amazing. It was so cool. The youngest was 6, the oldest was 39. And we were like, it was just it was better than we even dreamed possible. So if your child, your loved one, your friend is non-speaker, minimal speaking, right, under 50 words, or just not having conversational speech with you. They could be an unreliable speaker who scripts all day, talks all the time, but you still can't ask them how their day was and get a full answer. Those people all benefit from bypassing the fine motor required of speech and using their gross motor to spell. So an evaluation with an S2C practitioner is a great place to start. I love being a parent practitioner because we all know in autism, no parent is going to lie to another parent or mislead another parent. When I started this journey, my SLP was like, I said, I'm going to try this thing with Evan. And she said, well, some of the skeptics or the critics think that, the person holding the letterboard is actually manipulating the answers and influencing the answers. And I said, well, I'm the one who's going to do it with him. Like, I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? Right? Like I want to hear his voice. So I'm not worried about it. I'm not dropping him off at a clinic and having somebody else do it while I'm not there. Like even today, as you know, I videotape every session I'm in. The parents are in there with me. I'm coaching the parents live because I'm like, there is nothing fishy about spelling or spelling to communicate or using a letterboard. And we want you to know that if your child meets any of those criteria, non-speaker, minimal, unreliable speaking, it can help them and it can help you know them, right, on a deeper level than you ever thought possible.
And I think that, for so many of those that are listening to this and, are in our situation, right? It's amazing to know that this is here, like this is available. This is on our menu to choose from, which, my son's 20 and it wasn't on our menu to choose from, at least that, anything that I felt was reliable. So to me, it's like you always are seeing autism, therapies, communication, diets, biomedical, whatever it is, right? We're constantly seeing things come out and we're waiting for the other families to maybe try it, or maybe we try it ourselves. And I love that it's just we're never giving up. It's like, hey, we want to know what's in our kids' brains. We want to know what their thoughts are. And, I've been following you guys on Facebook or social media, for several weeks now. And I'm like, every time I read it, I'm like crying. I'm like, oh my gosh, they like wrote that. Oh my goodness gracious. Like, I just can't even, I almost don't like watching or listening or, reading the post because I know I'm going to cry. And it's really beautiful. And I love it. Now I know that you talked a little bit about how long it could potentially take. Everybody's different, so I get that. Can you maybe just describe a typical session and how the parents play the role in that, like, and what that kind of looks like?
Yeah, totally. When I first started in 2017, if parents were like, oh, you do it first, like, I'm just going to watch for a while. I was new and I was like, okay, I didn't want to step on any other parents' toes or tell them what to do. And I don't do that anymore. I make sure that all my parents are on the boards by the second or third session, because those first students took the longest to get to open-ended because they weren't practicing outside of their sessions with me. So I know I'm doing nobody any favors, right? Like, I am 1000% trying to work myself out of a job. My goal is to give you the tools so that you can do this on your own. So let's just say you don't have a budget, right, for an S2C practitioner weekly, or well, although there are some grants out there, like NAA has a Give a Voice campaign, and they're like that they'll give you money for any practitioner anywhere, like, that you want to go see and do evaluations with. But whatever, you want to come and get jump started, do a couple sessions, learn what to do, go home and practice, and then come back later. Like, that's possible. So you walk in the door, like, I've done an intake form with you. One of our core values at Transcending Apraxia is to value parents' time. So I put a lot of thought into what questions I ask on my intake questionnaire. I do not ask you at what age your child rolled over and what age they sat up. like, those things that we filled out, like, in triplicate, like, who really, do you need to know that? So I literally only ask what I really need to know to have the most successful first session with your speller, with your child. And then I go right to it. So you come in the door and I say, I'm going to go right to spelling, so that if your child's anxious, I can quickly put them at ease to go, this was not a test. I'm not testing you. And I'm going to support you so you pass this with flying colors, even if you think it's a test, right? That I'm going to, and so by the very first one, when I say, hey, my name's Dawnmarie, and on a piece of paper, I write out DAWNMARIE, people call me DM. Let's just spell that, right? Okay. And I put this board up and they got their pencil. I might even hand over hand it the first time. Be like, we're going to poke that D like that. Okay. Now you find the next letter. Ready? Poke that M. And then they poke the M. And I'm like, that's it. That's what we're going to do today. And then I keep going through the lesson. I read like a little paragraph of information about hopefully something interesting. Sometimes it's interesting to the speller, sometimes it's not. But I mean, we do lessons on anything from Bitcoin to Aretha Franklin to the Beatles to what, like, it doesn't matter, something current events, something history. It's meant to be interesting. The dung beetle, the littles always love that one because we get to talk about poop through the whole lesson. So whatever, like, age appropriate content, right? We want to feed their brain. We want to read them paragraphs also too, because as speakers, like, I could stop my sentence in the middle of what I'm saying and pivot. And as long as I don't change topic, you can follow me, but you can't do that when you're a typer or a writer. You have to actually write like a writer. So we have to read to them. We have to read age appropriate books and age appropriate materials in chunks so they have it modeled for them. This is how you communicate by spelling in sentences, right? So we read a chunk, we practice some spell words, we practice some questions based off of what I just read you. So only once you've developed a little bit of flow and accuracy do I start asking you to spell words that maybe I just read, but I didn't pre-spell, or I ask you a question that wasn't really in the lesson, but is more based on prior knowledge. And we're building the bridges. Again, the cognition's totally there. We're just building the bridge from the cognition to the motor of being able to move your eyes, find the target before you poke the letter. We're never actually teaching these kids to spell, for the record. They all end up saying, I always knew how to spell, or I taught myself at an early age. I could always read. Like, they're hyperlexic or whatever the gift is of how their brains are wired. We're just teaching them to point accurately to the letters in order to spell the words, right? So that's kind of how a lesson looks. And like how long it takes does depend on what you ordered off the motor menu. in terms of other sort of complex motor issues. You might have Tourette's, you might have, there's all sorts of things, seizure disorders. But ultimately, if you're practicing and communicating with a practitioner, really, I feel like I have everybody on a 26 board starting open stuff within 12 to 15 months. And by 18 months, usually fully open. I think the longest it's ever taken me was 3.5 years. And that was a child who's super complex, but I just presented on him at the NAA conference on complex motor kids. So you can do it. I mean, like, nothing was working to this level before, just beyond requesting. So even 3.5 years, when I think about it, I'm like, if I knew without a shadow of a doubt, the longest it would take me is 3.5 years to know my child, I'd do it, right? I'd be like, done. Right? We have a whole lifetime ahead. And I'm like, for most people, it's not going to take that long. So it's
I love that. Well, one thing that you said on our first session that has literally stuck with me, and I'm like, don't forget to say this in her interview, because it, like, I think of it often, is that, you're like, well, Jackson's been listening for 20 years. Like, he is an amazing listener. And I don't know why, like, clearly we know our kids are there and we know that we're talking, and often we talk, we try to be their for lack of a better description. So please don't get mad if I say this, whoever's listening or watching, but we try to be their voice the best way we know how. We try to be their advocate. And yet they're listening. They hear everything we say. They hear everything the therapists are talking about. They hear everything that's going on in the house. They hear everything. And we don't, well, at least I didn't, maybe others do this, but I didn't. I'm definitely guilty of this. I never really in my head gave Jackson that description of, wow, he's been listening for 20 years. Like, that was such a powerful aha, no pun intended, moment for me, because it was, it really touched me. And it really kind of got to me at the core of like, wow, like that's so powerful to think of our kids as they've been listening. So I wanted to make sure I said that, because I think if that can give somebody else that kind of powerful moment in their gut of like, wow, like, I look at him completely different after you said that. Like, I always looked at him wonderful and thought he was brilliant and that he was capable of limitless growth. But when you said that, he has been listening for 20 years. He is an amazing listener. It was just like, yeah, of course. Like, so anyways, I wanted to make sure I said that, because it was just such a powerful moment for me. And I'm so glad that you said it. Like, you probably were like, of course, didn't she know that? Well, like, I never thought it out loud. Clearly, right. So it was very, very powerful for me. So, okay. For those that don't live in San Diego, can they still come to your clinic?
Absolutely. So here we have local clients. We have what we call semi-local clients, where folks who drive maybe more than an hour or something to get here will come twice a month. And then we have what are called visiting client intensives. So you come for like 2 days, get a hotel room for one night or for 2 nights, and you get 2 sessions a day. We would do more, except it's way too much on the speller, right? Their eyes get fatigued. It's a lot. The eyes are still fine motor muscles, and we can't take the looking out of this equation. So they have to look for the letters. So they do get tired after 2 sessions, but we put a break in between. So they'll do a session and they go have coffee, take a walk, whatever, and you come back an hour later and do your second session. And we try to do them in the morning so folks can go off and do something fun in San Diego for the day or whatever. Sometimes they're the afternoon, but we'll do 2 days. And like I said, we'll assess, we'll figure out the right boards, and then we immediately start coaching, right? So that you can go home after 3 more sessions where we've done a paragraph, then we have you do a paragraph of the lesson, then I do another paragraph, and you have all the videotapes, and you can go home and practice. And then we stay in touch, because you can either come back and do another session or an intensive, or you could do a Zoom session, or even record one of your own home sessions. And then we can schedule a consult time where we have pre-watched it, written out notes to you, and then we go through it together, like frame by frame, to go, okay, here's what I'm talking about in this note. This is what I would try, and answer any questions. So you can have that support virtually. And then under Empowered 2, we actually have an online 8-week CRP course. We call it CRP, meaning communication regulation partner, because if you're not calm and regulated, like that's the biggest ingredient to being a good communication partner, is being regulated and knowing how to co-regulate with your non-speaker. So we have this 8-week course that includes 7 of those video feedbacks, but also a lot of classroom content. So that's an option for folks too. It's still ideal if you've done an in-person session before you do the CRP course, but not impossible. It's just a little harder to do your very first session the very first time, having never seen anyone do it with your child, right? So, but not impossible. So some people are very resourceful. You have to know what your inner resources are there, right? And if that sounds like something you're like down for that, then that's great, no matter where you live. And then lastly, we have these camps that we've been doing, but we've just started those up. So our San Diego one for August is actually already full. So we're looking to see when we can do another one, either in Tampa or San Diego. We alternate the coasts to try to cover the states, but so lots of options for those things.
I love it. Just constantly, emerging and evolving and just all the above. So, how can people learn more about you?
So I would say go to one of our 2 websites. The first is the transcendingapraxia.com. That's our San Diego practice. And you can read all about our team there. And then the other is empowered2.net. On that website, you'll also see a resource tab that has a lot of our previous presentations we've done at national conferences. And myself and my partner, Dana Johnson, who is a fabulous PhD occupational therapist from Florida. And she's kind of the guru of purposeful motor and how gross motor, full body regulation supports the fine motor communication and building autonomy. So you can see all of our presentations on the Empowered 2 website.
And you guys can follow them on social media and cry a lot when you get to see all the amazing, I should say, testimonials. So now for those families that are maybe watching and, thinking, gosh, I just don't know where to turn sometimes, or I feel a little bit alone, or sometimes I feel, helpless. What message do you have for them?
I used to have a sign on top of my sunrise playroom door that said, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain, because life felt pretty stormy back then. And I also used to think, what I think now is, if I had had a crystal ball and could see where my children would be at by this age, it wouldn't look anything like I thought I wanted it to look like. But now that I'm here and what we're doing and my children are spelling to communicate, I would not change this for all the money in the world. That I thought having a non-speaker was like this horrible sentence for him, for both of them. And now I'm like blown away by who these non-speakers are on the inside, as I've gotten to know hundreds of them. They've all gotten fluent on the letterboard, and you can have that with your own child too. I love being an autism mom, and I love working with non-speakers. And I want every parent out there to know they can have that too. They just got to keep reaching out for support and keep trying. Don't ever bury the hope. Hope is a good thing.
I love that. Don't ever bury the hope. Hope is a good thing. Oh, goodness. What an amazing interview. Thank you so much, Dawnmarie, for being here. And just thank you for everything you're doing for the community. I mean, it's amazing.
It's my pleasure. I love it.
And to everybody else, thank you guys for watching or listening, wherever you guys are at. And remember what Dawnmarie said, don't bury the hope. Until next time. Bye, guys.